We now come to the vote in the health sector, volume B5, volume 6, and the question is that vote health stand part of the schedules. The chairman of the committee speaks first. I call Simon O'Connor, and Mr. Connor, your task is to set out the major findings
Absolutely.
Of your committee in relation to the estimates. Simon O'Connor.
Can rest assured, Mr. Chair, that we will happily be speaking to the main findings of estimates for vote health from the Health Select Committee. I always say it when I stand up, but it is an excellent cooperative committee. It's one of those ones that generally we are in agreement on what we have to do for the betterment of the country. By and large, and I see my colleague Barbara Stewart nodding, and by and large we get that right. Obviously there's a few tensions, and you can indicate and see those in the report. As context for what came through the estimates report, we are in a fine space for health. We know that the under 13-year-olds are now getting free GP visits, and prescriptions are really positive step there. One thing I thought was really neat, I hadn't been aware of until it was reminded to me, 94% of those under 8 months of age now are fully immunised, a huge step forward. And if I may make a plug, 94%, and may I make a plug to those people out there, please vaccinate. Doesn't matter if it's your children, your teenagers or older, very positive. 44,000 more elective surgeries, Mr. Chair, compared to 2007-2008. So this is the context in which the estimates began and was heard. A 62-day target, Mr. Chair, for those to get their first cancer treatment. I won't go into the context of the past, but that's an incredibly good period of time and something I think the Select Committee, I think it's world leading actually, Mr. Hudson, but this is the context in which the committee began its discussions. We're putting in, it was acknowledged, further funding to allow 4,000 more elective surgeries a year. So again, bear in mind, we have increased by about 44,000 surgeries a year, and we intend to push that higher towards 48, I would hope eventually 50,000. And hopefully none of us will have to avail ourselves of this particular target, but 95% of those going into the emergency department are seen within 6 hours. Mr. Chair, vote health is the second largest vote in Budget 2015. It accounts for about 17.8% of the total appropriation. So be in no doubt, as this committee will be, health is a serious issue. We noted in our report that the vote increased by approximately 4.9%. So we're now spending about 15.868. In fact, that's not approximate, that's what we are spending. Let's be precise about that. $15.868 billion. And in fact, one of the things we noted in our report is that $55 million of non-departmental capital has been moved and provided to help DHBs around deficit support. And I mention that because I don't think we're under any illusion as a committee and hopefully as a House that it can be tight for some DHBs, and that was acknowledged also in the estimates with the Minister. It goes without saying that the Minister is the Honourable Dr. Jonathan Coleman, and when I was reading out those positive lines at the start, I think it's incredibly important to note to the House that that is not purely the musings, thoughts, insights or feedback of the chair of the committee. That was in fact the feedback of the committee itself to the Minister. I quote, "We congratulated Dr. Coleman on his appointment last year as Minister of Health and expressed our satisfaction with the working relationship he has established with us." That was the words put forward in a number of the questioning, but also written up in the report. And I'd like to thank all the members who contribute to that and the continuing positive relationship we have with the Minister of Health. We noted there's been a change in sector leadership. Those who follow the health sector will be aware that we've had an acting director for a while, Mr. Chai Chua, very shortly before we moved into this estimates hearing. He was made the director. We were curious of how that was beginning, and amongst other things we noted that surveys they've done recently have shown improving staff engagement, and we're looking forward to seeing more of that as it goes along. Other areas we looked at was the whole demographics, I should get that right, the demographics particularly around chronic disease. It's something which crops up in our informal conversations, Mr Chair, from time to time, and certainly been in front of the committee. But when we talk about chronic disease, we're talking about things like COPD, that's an acronym for chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and we also got the likes of diabetes. That's very much front and centre of debates at the moment. In fact, over the weekend had quite a constructive conversation in that space about how we engage diabetes, and particularly around healthy decisions around food and sport. So, Mr Chair.
Simon O'Connor.
Thank you, Mr Chair. So when we're looking at these chronic diseases, the Minister noted quite rightly, I thought, and I hope I'm not stealing his thoughts later on, that new models of care are needed. And while we've always been around the sooner, faster, more convenient, we, I think, as a government understand the need in order that people can obtain their health needs closer to home from particularly GPs, medical practitioners they trust. Health practitioners they trust, I should be clear on that, particularly as we have a new bill before the House, but how we might work that. And I've spoken to the House before about how we better work the scope of practices. I use, again, nurses doing endoscopy, GPs doing skin work and so forth. This is part of how we can better engage, and we can do it in these chronic areas. And one thing that has been announced, and we touched on later in our report, is around the development of pain teams. Now, strictly speaking, orthopaedic issues are not chronic, or I don't think they are. I'd have to take some medical advice on that. But in the pain teams, again, pulling together, the Honourable Member notes, they are very painful, and what we're trying to do is sort of a lead provider in the community to help drive the care. So again, you might have a GP, a specialist, a nurse, an occupational therapist who's going to take the lead in that support. I thought the other thing which was really useful, Mr Chair, that came out was the whole notion of promoting healthy lifestyles. In fact, if I recall the session correctly, I asked the Minister of Health, not only as the Minister of Health, but the Minister of Sport, whether that was not only a coincidence of those portfolios coming together, which of course it wasn't. I think good insight of the Prime Minister, but how that was going to work together. And the Minister noted, of course, the Healthy New Zealand pilot, which has been launched, I think well lauded in the health community, and also work that's been undertaken to see how we might get that crossover, particularly for our young people in schools around sport and healthy eating. Two things I'm quite passionate about when I visit my primary schools, some that will be in the most effectively wealthiest suburbs in the country, and then go to other areas which are amongst, if not the poorest. You look at the lunches and the choices that have been made there. I think we can make improvements, not only be it through working with the principals, but obviously the families. But the other is activity. In fact, I think it was on Prime News tonight or TV3 about how much time you spend in front of your digital devices and so forth. So how do we get our young people active? And the other thing I'd note, and we noted in the report from the Minister, that encouraging activity, the notion of cycleways, I just have to put a plug for that. The government put out some money recently, and the good people of Tamaki are most pleased to have got the biggest chunk of that as we put a cycleway from Glen Innes through to Tamaki Drive, and I'm very much looking forward to stopping my running one weekend and actually jump on a bike. Smoke-free targets, some really good work going on there, Mr Speaker. Speaking personally, still have, and it is noted in the report, I think many of us still have concern, particularly with young Māori women, almost 50% smoking rates. I think there's stuff that we need and must do there. And I think that's an important signal to the community as well. Look, we've indicated that about another $12.4 million has been allocated to extend the bowel screening program. That's been done in the Waitemata, so that's been extended again. A little bit like prostate work as well. You do this as pilots, you see what is possible, take those learnings and then see whether it's feasible to roll out across the country. I'm conscious we're probably coming close to time, and I've got quite a number of pages to go. The one I did want to sort of finish around, if I can, is around the flu vaccine. It's sort of coming out of time now, but the committee was interested why there was an apparent delay. The long and the short was, as the flu vaccine was coming into the country, it was made aware that some strains could be introduced to the vaccine. In other words, there were new strains of flu out there, and it seemed from the reports that we heard it was better to actually get the new vaccines in so that all New Zealanders could be, well, those choosing the latter vaccinations could be fully protected from these new strains. So there was a small blip at the start. I think we've got every confidence that that will continue and work well next year. But I just wanted to mention that I don't think we want any impression, certainly from the committee, that somehow there was bad planning or a lack of vaccines available. It was a prudent health choice to look at the best medical and scientific information out there to say, hey, new strains, I'm sorry I can't quote what they are, but new strains, let's get them into the vaccine and make sure New Zealanders are good to go. An area I'm always keen on, palliative care, $76+ million has been invested in that. That's going to work in a number of areas. It plays back into that original discussion I was having about that sooner, faster, more convenient. A lot of it's for hospice care, which importantly is done from home, Mr. Chair. So
The Honourable